Just tell me why you're here.
Because we want to save the planet!
That's well rehearsed. Why do you think the people in that building behind you don't seem to be doing that job for you?
They probably don't understand.
Who don't understand?
Them.
What do you want to say to the people in that building?
We'll be left activists! You'll be left shit! And we also want to say, what do we want? Save the planet! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Save the planet! When do we want it? Now!
Every child should be in school and they should be learning. They shouldn't be bunking off, and it's very irresponsible for people to encourage children to do so.
Kids, eh? They always think the grown-ups just don't get it. But now it looks like they're right. Today, that universal phenomenon manifested itself in a series of coordinated protests across the globe. From Australia to South Africa, from India to Greece, via Indonesia and many other countries, millions took to the streets. In London, outside Parliament, I met Akira, about to start university, and Orla, who took time out from school to be here.
I'm in my final year of A-levels and I can't miss any lessons. Every hour counts. But if we don't create change, there will be no point of me going to university. There won't be a point of me getting a high-earning job.
There's a lot going on in politics here right now that isn't focused on this issue. Do you feel hopeful that this government or a future government will actually grapple with this?
All you can do is hope that your voice will actually be heard, because that's why you've elected them. If not, then it's literally an undemocratic country, and we hope that's not the way the future is going to be.
Given the existential nature of the threat, optimism is a striking feature of the climate movement. Perhaps that's because they feel the momentum is with them. A recent poll suggested that in Britain, concern about the environment is at an all-time high. Well, it's very clear what people here want. They want the government to take action on climate change. They want them to do it much faster than they're currently doing. But it seems like there's a huge disconnect between the people in this park and the people in that building.
Political systems are often short-termist, in the sense that they think about the upcoming election and they think about, should I be investing in something that is only later, that I will only reap the benefits of later. However, climate change is something that is no longer a question of the later, it's a question of the now.
But the way democracy works is that if a government inflicts economic pain on its citizens, they're then free to vote them out at the next election, and somebody else can come in who's not going to do that in the short term.
Which is why it's very interesting and very promising to see so many people out on the streets now exercising their democratic right, especially those who don't yet have a right to vote.
Another reason for optimism among the protesters, perhaps, is that many believe the problem can be solved with a set of economic and environmental policies known as the Green New Deal.
There's a lot of policies in play, but in summary what it is investing in new industries which would bring a generation of new jobs that are clean, investing in homes so that they're not leaking energy into the sky and our energy bills are so high, into public transport.
Much of the policy work in this area comes from the left. System change, not climate change, is a popular slogan. But those who've been at this for many years now see, on the other end of the political spectrum, they're beginning to embrace the issue too.
I think they recognise they need to do something. I think they're still not actually doing what needs to be done. And so, for example, we've still got a government that is supporting fossil fuels with vast subsidies, that is forcing fracking on communities up and down the country, that is planning to expand Heathrow Airport, that has no conception at all that our economic system needs to fundamentally change.
To be fair, earlier this year the UK did become the first major economy to commit in law to ending its contribution to global warming by the middle of the century. But many believe the target needs to be much more ambitious. Jeremy Corbyn, Gabriel Gatehouse from Newsnight. This government has committed itself to net zero emissions by 2050, but these people here are saying that's far too late. Would you commit Labour to doing it sooner than that?
Much sooner.
How soon?
I can't give you the exact date. I couldn't say within 3-5 years, but I think it can be much sooner than that.
Within the decade?
Listen, it's got to be sooner than that because the levels of global emissions are getting worse, global warming is getting worse, and the species and habitat loss is getting worse. So we also need trade policies that reflect that. And so cutting our own emissions also means measuring the emissions from goods that we import.
It was a solitary Swedish schoolgirl who propelled the climate to the front of the global agenda. Pressure is building on governments for collective and coordinated action. But will they? In an increasingly polarised world, the kids really are beginning to look like the grown-ups in the room.
Well, earlier I spoke to Christiana Figueres, the former Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. She led the negotiations on the 2015 Paris Agreement. I asked her if she felt let down by the political leaders who signed up to it.
Do I feel let down? Well, let me take the case of the United States. I actually think it is a huge disadvantage for the United States, for the economy of the United States, that President Trump has decided that he will leave the Paris Agreement, which can only happen in November of next year. Because you see, the fact is that that vacuum in leadership that has been produced by the intent of the White House is quickly being occupied by other countries who totally understand that the products and services that are decarbonized are the products and services that are of growing demand. And if you don't believe that, ask the people on the streets. Because the people on the streets want decarbonized products and services, and particularly young people want to be working with companies that are actually aligned with the science. So the United States is sadly, at least in those states that are not continuing to decarbonize, they're leaving their competitive advantage. And those states that continue will, of course, be the states that provide the dovetailing for the United States to come back into the Paris Agreement once we have different political leadership.
Putting the US aside, even the happy, willing participants don't seem to be going as fast as they need to.
Absolutely true. The fact is there is no country that is going at the speed that we need. And one understands that decarbonization is complex, and we've never done it before, so we have to invent the policies and the incentives to put into place. But from the point of view of science, enough experimentation time. We have to move forward. And that is why I'm grateful that next Monday here at the United Nations, at the summit that is being called by the Secretary General, there are at least 50 countries that are going to be coming forward to say they are ready to start the process that they have to finish by next year, which is increasing their ambition, increasing their goal of decarbonizing.
The UK government has set a deadline of 2050 to achieve zero net emissions. Many climate change activists here want that to be brought forward to 2025. What do you think is broadly the right target?
Well, the sooner the better, obviously, because this is about cumulative emissions. And so the longer we stretch it, the worse it's going to be. So sooner is better. 2025, frankly, doesn't seem very realistic. So I am of the opinion that we should set realistic goals and then push ourselves. Stretch goals, definitely, and push ourselves. Yesterday, not a country, but one of the largest companies of the world, Amazon, set a groundbreaking target where they want to be at net zero by 2040. Honestly, 2040 seems to me like a very good deadline for us all to get into the discipline of decarbonizing our economies.
I wonder, do you worry that initiatives like the Green New Deal mean the left own the environment as an issue, and in these divided times that means it can never have the broad appeal that's needed if change really is going to happen?
Climate cannot be a divisive issue, and that is one thing that I truly admire in the UK, having lived in London myself for 2 years. I truly admire that the UK has really understood that this is not a partisan issue. This is not a divisive issue. You actually have both parties coming together in the UK to push for the decarbonization that they know that is good for them. Unfortunately, in the United States, it still is a partisan issue, which makes absolutely no sense because the common good is the common good. This is not ideology. This is not a belief. This is facts. This is science. And above all, this is economic prosperity. That's the piece that we haven't understood. We all continue to think that addressing climate change is a huge burden and that it's a big cost. And study after study after study has come out now in the past 4 to 5 years, and recently again, to say this is not a cost. This is the best investment we can make, and protection of our planet, protection of our natural resources is what is the basis for economic prosperity and certainly for inclusivity.
Cristina Figueres, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And now I'm joined by Lola Farken from the UK Student Climate Network. She was at the protests in London today. Thanks for coming in after pounding those streets. Well, you heard what Cristina Figueres said. She's the person who negotiated the Paris Accord, and she says she thinks 2025 is an unrealistic ask to achieve zero net emissions. Would you agree with her?
Well, the UK Student Climate Network don't call for 2025 as a target.
It's Extinction Rebellion, isn't it?
Yeah, we call for 2030.
She thought 2040.
Yeah, we don't think that that's enough. We think that when it comes to the climate, when it comes to the most significant political issue of our generation, we need massive, radical changes which are going to happen in the next decade. We want a Green New Deal, we want educational reform, we want youth empowerment in our political environment, and we want to see that in the next 10 years. We don't want to see that pushed to 2040.
And some of those things you say are not really related to decarbonisation. They're related to a sort of radical agenda on lots of areas. And I wonder whether you don't think that perhaps you should decouple those things, because you're going to reach a broader audience and get broader support if you go laser-like on perhaps decarbonisation.
Well, we don't believe that it's right to decouple those issues. We think that when we look at the causes of climate change, it's caused by so many different factors, economic factors, social factors, which date back centuries. To try and divorce decarbonisation from those issues is not realistic. And we believe that when we bring it in this package, which is going to help ordinary people, of a Green New Deal...
But don't you just alienate quite a large proportion of the population who you need to appeal to get things moving?
Well, we don't believe that's true. We think that people want radical change. They look at business as usual and they say that's not enough, that's not working for us. And if you look at the millions of people across the world who are coming out and striking, they're saying enough is enough. We want something big and we want it now.
And that is impressive, but millions aren't. And you need to bring everyone with you. Do you think that a growth-based economy works in your way of seeing the future and what has to happen?
Well, I think the question of degrowth is a difficult one. But in terms of how we see our economy, we definitely believe that we need to diversify the metrics by which we measure economic progress and whether or not the economy is doing well. We believe that looking at just GDP as the sole metric of whether or not a country is doing well is completely unrealistic. It doesn't factor in climate. It doesn't factor in how the economy works for ordinary people.
And just a last question on personal sacrifices. We heard today people talking about, they're not going to have children. I wonder, will your generation make different kinds of sacrifices? What kinds of personal sacrifices are you expecting people to make for your cause? I mean, is it about plastic coffee cups, or is it about not having children, or is it both?
Well, we think it's about actually neither. We think it's about coming out in the streets and calling for those with power to do something. We think it's the responsibility of those who have caused this crisis, the fossil fuel executives, the politicians who have done nothing, that they should be the ones who are taking action.
So young people can still fly, they can still drink plastic coffee cups?
Well, politicians need to make it...
from plastic coffee cups.
Politicians need to make it easier for ordinary people to, not fly. They need to be implementing free public transport. Just think about how many people's lives that's going to improve. And then people don't have to make these tough choices, which are, might be economically difficult for them.
Lola Farken, thank you so much for joining us. I'm afraid we've run out of time there.